I don't recognize you. Are you new? I heard we hired a few mid-career recruits recently, so you must be one of them. Well then, go get me some coffee as a greeting to your senior.
As I stood there, confused, the young man who introduced himself as Anthony waved his hand. It seemed to mean hurry up and go.
My dad is the head of HR, you know? What do you think will happen if you get on my bad side? You wouldn't want to be job hunting again at your age, would you?
Susan, the female employee who was with me, raised her eyebrows at the rude Anthony.
What? How could you say such a thing? Mark, you don't have to go.
I smiled at Susan and shook my head. It's okay. I learned a lot about the place on my way from the reception to here. All right, I'll go get it. When I said that, Anthony grinned.
You catch on quick.
Little did he know that his smirk wouldn't last long. I'm Mark, a 41-year-old company employee. I've been working at my current company since I graduated from high school. 10 years ago, I was transferred to an overseas branch, and I returned to the US last month because I was ordered to return to the head office. When I was transferred overseas, I had just gotten married and had a newborn child. More than anything, I was reluctant to leave the US and was extremely anxious about whether I could manage. Although I had been studying at a language school, I wasn't fluent, which made it even more daunting. However, I am now grateful to the president who gave me the opportunity to learn so much. I used to come back to the US occasionally for Christmas and other holidays, but now I can finally live here permanently, and my wife and child are overjoyed. Seeing their smiles, I felt naturally motivated to do my best. One day, before my first day back at the head office, I visited the headquarters. I wanted to greet the president and others who had helped me. The president had kindly agreed to my request. However, a problem arose.
I'm sorry, Mark. I checked on the phone, but it seems the president's previous schedule is running late, and he hasn't returned yet.
When I went to the reception at the appointed time, Susan, the receptionist, looked apologetic.
I think he'll be back shortly. In the meantime, if you'd like, I can show you around the office.
I was taken aback by Susan's offer. But, as I hesitated, not wanting to take her away from her post, Susan smiled.
The president asked me to. Since it's been a while since you've been at the head office, he wanted me to show you around.
I understood. After all, it had been 10 years. Even the reception area looked quite different from what I remembered. There were renovated areas and offices had moved. A lot had changed in my absence. I thought it best to accept her offer. If you say so, then please. I nodded to the other receptionist as well, and thus, I followed Susan. Indeed, the head office was quite different from my memory. It was spacious and open, with a stylish atmosphere. It was a testament to the company's growth. Even though I had been away for 10 years, I felt proud to have been part of that growth. The previously sterile and plain walls and corridors now had greenery, like potted plants, and there were free spaces along the large windows where people could take breaks or work. Is that an employee on break? I saw a male employee sitting slouched in a chair in a corner of the free space a little distance away, fiddling with his smartphone. He was angrily talking to a younger male who seemed to be his junior. Other employees glanced at them and quickly walked past, avoiding them. Noticing my gaze, Susan frowned.
Again.
Is there a problem? I asked, just as the young man who was being scolded passed by me with a tearful face. Had he made a mistake and gotten scolded for it? As I worried about him, Susan whispered an explanation to me.
The man who was angry joined the sales department about 3 months ago. He has a bit of a reputation, in a bad way.
According to Susan, The man who was yelling was named Anthony. He was the son of this company's HR director and had gotten his job through connections. Regardless of how he got the job, it wouldn't be a problem if he worked diligently. But he used his father's authority to do whatever he pleased, causing trouble for those around him. He slacked off, blamed others for his tasks and mistakes, and from what I heard, he had a lot of bad traits. Susan herself had experienced harassment from him while working. Even if his father is putting pressure on people, his actual boss is the head of the sales department, right? I can't imagine the boss wouldn't say anything. I questioned. Susan shook her head.
There are rumors that his father, the head of HR, is pressuring everyone to stay quiet. And the head of the sales department is quite a gentle person.
I see, I said, thoroughly exasperated. Susan continued.
This is just something I heard from other people in the sales department, but the head of the sales department did try to do something about Anthony. However, caught between Anthony's troubles and the pressure from the head of HR, he eventually fell ill.
If Susan's story was true, it was extremely malicious. The president himself was someone who disliked hiring through connections. Despite that, he must have trusted the head of HR to have hired Anthony. This was tantamount to betraying the president.
Hey, you!
A voice suddenly called out, interrupting my thoughts about Anthony. I turned around to see the man in question, Anthony, standing right there.
Hey, old man, you guys have been glancing at me for a while now. It's obvious, you know. I'm Anthony, the rising star of the sales department.
His language was hardly what you'd expect from a company employee, especially when meeting someone for the first time. I sighed quietly. Sure, I was older, but calling me old man right off the bat was something else.
You don't look familiar. Are you new? I heard we hired a few mid-career recruits recently, so you must be one of them. Well then, go get me some coffee as a greeting to your senior.
As I stood there, bewildered, Anthony smirked at me. I had run into a strange guy. And he wanted to use me as his errand boy. His behavior towards me, a complete stranger, made Susan's story more believable. I couldn't help but imagine that the young man who had left earlier with a tearful face had also been subjected to unreasonable demands. Seeing my displeased expression, Anthony waved his hand. It seemed to mean hurry up and go.
My dad is the head of HR, you know? What do you think will happen if you get on my bad side? You wouldn't want to be job hunting again at your age, would you?
Susan, who had been watching our interaction, raised her eyebrows. She couldn't stand his rudeness any longer.
What? How could you say such a thing? Mark, you don't have to go.
I smiled at Susan and shook my head. It's okay. I learned a lot about the place on my way from the reception to here. All right, I'll go get it. As Susan tried to protest, Anthony tugged at her sleeve.
You catch on quick. Old man, that's a high score for you. Now, you stay here and chat with me. Oh, and make sure the coffee is hot and low sugar.
Apologizing to Susan in my mind, I left the room and headed in the opposite direction of the coffee shop. I quickly found the room labeled HR department and muttered to myself, I'll be right back. A few minutes later, I returned to Anthony with the coffee he had requested, but he frowned in dissatisfaction.
Too fast. I wanted to talk to Susan more. Can't you read the room? Wait, Dad. Why are you with him?
Anthony's words trailed off as he saw the person standing next to me. His face turned to one of shock. Taking advantage of the moment, Susan, who had been forced to keep Anthony company, quickly hid behind me.
You fool!
The HR director, Mr. Brown, who was with me, marched up to Anthony and grabbed him by the collar.
Dad, stop it. What are you doing?
The bizarre scene drew the attention of passing employees. How about that? Just as I told you, he made me, a complete stranger, go get coffee as a greeting to a senior. I said to the HR director, Mr. Brown, who apologized to me while still holding his son's collar.
Yes. I am truly sorry for his incredibly rude behavior.
This is ridiculous. What's going on here? And who do you think you are, talking to my dad like that?
Anthony shook off his father's hand and continued, fixing his hair.
Didn't you tell me to just do whatever? Why do I have to go through this?
You fool, be quiet. This man is the next president.
The HR director's words caused a stir among the employees, including Susan and Anthony.
The next president? Seriously?
I could hear murmurs from the surrounding employees, saying things like, Anthony finally did it. I can't let that slide. What do you mean by just do whatever? What do you think of this company and your job? Mr. Brown, do you have any idea about your son's words? As I narrowed my eyes and deliberately asked the director, the room fell silent. Not only Anthony and the director, but also the other employees seemed to sense my anger and were trembling. Only the current president and a few top executives knew that I was the next president. The HR director was one of them, but he probably never imagined his son would make such a blunder. It seemed he hadn't told his son about me. Naturally, Susan, an ordinary employee, didn't know I was the next president either, and she looked up at me with wide eyes.
Huh? What do you mean? Aren't you just one of the mid-career hires?
I chuckled. Indeed, I might look like an unremarkable middle-aged man. My gentle face, which lacks a certain firmness, is actually a secret insecurity of mine. However, I couldn't just leave him be. It wasn't because he made the next president run an errand. From the content of his conversation with Susan and his behavior towards me, it was clear that Anthony was not a proper employee. I pretended to comply with Anthony. Seeing that his father, who was involved in his hiring, was also a problem, I stopped by the HR department before buying the coffee. Can I have a word? I called out, and the director, knowing I was the next president, immediately followed me. On the way, while buying coffee at the shop, I told the director about Anthony's words and the rumors I had heard. It was supposed to be announced at the next morning assembly, but I am Mark Smith, the newly appointed next president. I look forward to working with you. I said this in a slightly louder voice so that everyone around could hear and smiled at them. While murmurs of surprise arose, the employees, except for Anthony, smiled back at me.
Huh? You've got to be kidding. Your last name is completely different from the president's.
Whether he couldn't grasp reality or didn't want to accept it, Anthony snorted and glared at me. It seemed Anthony had a rigid belief that the president's position should naturally be inherited by a family member. Despite the HR director's pale face and apologies to me, which clearly indicated it wasn't a lie, Anthony couldn't see the truth. It's true that many people might want to pass the presidency to a family member. Our president just isn't one of them. After graduating from high school, I joined this company. At first, I was often looked down upon for only having a high school diploma, but I diligently studied not only my work but also manners and languages, which paid off. My proactive attitude seemed to be appreciated, and I gradually gained the trust of the president, who started assigning me more important tasks. 10 years ago, I got the opportunity to work at an overseas branch. I dare say, I am what you might call a self-made man. Even my colleagues, who are considered elites, recognize my efforts and achievements. Hearing my explanation, Anthony's mouth opened and closed in disbelief, like a fish out of water. Without focusing on bloodlines or academic background, The decision was made based on who could lead this company in the right direction. I am grateful to have been chosen. I respect the president as a second father, so it is a great honor for me. I smiled broadly, delivering the final blow. Anthony, finally accepting reality, turned as pale as his father.
I.
He stammered, his lips trembling. Mr. Brown, you are also at fault here. Seeing that Anthony was rendered speechless, I immediately turned my attention to the HR director. His shoulders jerked up as he had been humbly apologizing. We will conduct an investigation, but from what I heard today alone, there are many bad rumors about your son, and a lot of dissatisfaction among other employees. Given his arrogant attitude towards me, a complete stranger, these rumors are likely true. Both you and your son should prepare yourselves. The director looked up in shock.
Me too?
How could he think he would face no consequences? I sighed and shook my head. The president, who dislikes hiring through connections, must have trusted you to allow it. Not correcting your son's behavior is the same as betraying that trust. If you think there will be no penalties, you are gravely mistaken. At the very least, I will not overlook this. I conveyed to the director exactly what I had thought earlier. Then I remembered and handed the 2 coffees I had been holding to the director and Anthony. I had forgotten that I had bought one for the director as well. Please drink this and wait calmly for the results of the investigation. The director and Anthony, with bewildered expressions, took the now lukewarm coffee and slumped to the floor. Well, shall we go? Susan, could you show me around that area next? Susan, seemingly snapped back to reality, looked up.
Yes. Over here is the office of the technical department.
As I started walking behind her, I noticed the young male employee who had been yelled at by Anthony earlier, staring at me in astonishment. When I smiled back at him, I could hear the ugly argument between Anthony and the director behind me. Later, the investigation results for Anthony and the director came out, and the content was terrible. Skipping work openly during working hours, repeatedly engaging in power harassment. There was no end to the list. The director had been using his position to protect his son by pressuring others. There were many witnesses and testimonies, so evidence was quickly gathered. They were truly a malicious pair. As for the 2 of them, they have been absent from work without permission since the day Anthony made me buy coffee. They showed no sense of responsibility until the very end. In any case, they were already problematic, and now they have been absent without leave for more than 14 days. This allows us to send them a dismissal notice without any hesitation. They can now focus on job hunting together as a family. Not everyone is like them, but there are always people who become arrogant with promotions. Their relatives are often the same. As the new president, I will take my responsibilities seriously and ensure that my family does not become arrogant just because they are related to the president.
How did you like this story? Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.